Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Money Date. And today I want to talk to you about asset allocation. It is a frequently asked question. How should my portfolio be invested? I'm actually doing this outside. I'm in a wonderful, warm Maryland this afternoon, and I thought I jumped outside. It's been freezing to sit inside an office building with an AC on, so I thought I'd come on and chat with you guys outside. Anyway, I'll just make sure I can actually see. Thanks for hopping on. So, Money Dates. It's a time of the week that you allow yourself to pause, reflect, and check in with yourselves, right? We need to understand what's going on with our money. But besides that, I wanted to remind you the three things that you need to be paying attention to in your overall financial life. That is how much money you actually make. So what kind of income are you getting? Where is it coming from? And how much is actually being put into your bank account? Number two, how are your expenses? Are you tracking your expenses so that they are appropriate for your income level? And number three, your savings goals, my friends. We all need to have savings goals. So those are the three things that I constantly remind you to think about, all right? Now, for the overall discussion, thanks for hopping on. Hi, Jake. Hi, Janet. Good to have you. I can't see your comments for some reason, so drop a note in the chat. Let me know that you're here. I appreciate you guys very much. So, if you continue doing the basics, as I always talk on Money Dates, the whole reason for Money Dates is because we need to be reminded of things that are small, right? The things that we overlook. But if you continue doing this on weekly basis, right, at least keeping some kind of track. So I have an app on my phone that allows me to have this information current. I promise you that's going to be one of the things that's going to resolve your worries. That's going to be one of the things that's going to allow you to make better financial decisions, right, when it comes to understanding, how much cash flow you actually have. So please get in the habit of knowing those three things: your income, your expenses, and what are your savings goals, and how are you staying on the top. That's the whole idea about Money Date. Now, and as I come on here and share this with you every week and remind you, I also want to talk about a particular topic. So asset allocation, right? It's something that everybody talks about. It feels like it's a fancy set of words, right? But all it really means is how is your investment portfolio that could consist of a lot of different things is allocated. Allocation is just a proportion. So when you think about asset allocation, you may automatically think about stocks and bonds, real estate, other kinds of types of investments. So it's really a recipe. I think of it as a recipe. Think about this. When you bake in a pie, right, or a cake, you have all of these ingredients that are gonna go in the bowl so that you can produce a nice looking dessert. The same thing works when you're building and constructing an investment portfolio. You start with all of these pieces and you come up with a specific recipe. So asset allocation is the actual recipe for your portfolio. Now, you might be wondering how someone actually can figure out what the allocation is. Now, there's lots of things out there that talk about kind of like a rule of thumb. So the most typical one that you'll find out there says, take 100 and subtract your age from it, and the difference is how much you're supposed to have in stocks. So let's say you're 30 years old or you're 50 years old, you subtract 50 from 100, and that gives you 50. So 50% of your portfolio could technically be allocated to stocks. Now, I want to argue with that because, first of all, I think a 50-year-old should have a little bit more in terms of what their allocation is in equities or stocks. Number two, I think we're living longer, so we need to think about not 100, but maybe 110 or 120. And so because we're living longer, we need to make sure that our money living as long as we are. So that means that perhaps we can take more risk. Now, when we talk about risk in the setting of a portfolio construction, stocks or equities, stocks of all kinds of companies, US-based companies, international, which will also include developed countries, emerging countries. They all involve risk, and that's what affects the overall portfolio. Now, you also may have other asset classes such as bonds, gold, real estate, silver, commodities. Those are different asset classes that give you that broad and diversified allocation. So you have to figure out how that recipe is built. I'm sure a lot of it has to do with engaging with the right professional. But the risk that is represented in your portfolio are the assets that have that exposure, right? And they are typically in the form of stocks, right? Because you're buying companies, right? Stocks represent the companies. So going back to my example about the allocation, so the proper allocation for somebody who is maybe 50 years old or 30 years old would probably better to say, if it was just a general discussion rule of thumb, is to take let's say 120 and subtract their age. That would be probably a more appropriate allocation. For a 30-year-old, I think you need to be looking about 80% to 90% in stocks, because you need to think about not just getting to retirement, because that's what investments are designed to do. They're designed to help you achieve your goals. They're designed to give you income so that you don't have to work, right? So with that in mind, the higher portion of the portfolio, when they're invested in equities or stocks, that's what allows it to grow. So think about that, all right? Now, something else that I also like to mention, and before I close, thanks for hopping on. Good to have you here. Hi, John. Hi, Lisa. Awesome. Good to have you here. So something else I want to mention is that, and I talked about this a little bit before, think about the time horizon, because one of the variables that you can actually quite control, aside from changing and setting up your allocation, is how much time you actually have for particular investment. So what that means is that if your time horizon is short, right? Let's say you're going to need this money in the next year or 2 or 3. My friends, that means that you do not take risk with those funds, okay? That's rule number 1. So you have to think about your timeline. So the short timeline, we take practically no risk. If we have midterm kind of timeline, we could probably take some risk. So if there's 5 years or more on the average is what you have for this midterm timeline, yeah, then we can start thinking about exposure into equities, exposure into other types of investments, international stocks, US stocks, commodities, gold, all of those things, right? Because the reason for that is that the more time we have, the more chances, right, we can take if the market takes a downturn. So that's what really kind of makes up a diversified portfolio. And then of course, our category number 3, right, and all of these examples I'm giving you, I'm actually calling them buckets, but the category number 3 for the longer term horizon, of course, right, regardless, right, what your age is, if your time horizon is longer, you should be taking a little bit more risk so that you can get more return. That's it. So allocation actually is not that difficult as long as you understand the small components that go with it. And remember, always remember that time is your best friend in this investing game, okay? Nothing else, because you have no control over anything else. Yes, you can pick the right investments, you can pick the investments that don't cost you a lot of money, but if your time is off and your recipe or your allocation is not appropriate, it's not going to work. You are not going to get the results that you want. I hope this was useful. Now, I want to share with you a quote by Warren Buffett that I think is really interesting, because he's by far one of my idols that I follow quite a bit closer in the game of investing, and smartest man alive. So what he says is, rule number 1 is never to lose money, right? When you're investing and you investing means putting your money to work for you. So putting your money to work for you, rule number 1 is never to lose it. And then rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. How simple is that, right? But do we actually follow that? I'm going to leave you to think about this until next week, but double check and make sure that you've got an appropriate asset allocation for your risk tolerance, your goals, and your time horizon. Those are the things that you need to be concerned about. Not what is there the next hot thing to buy, right? Lately, people have been obsessed with cryptocurrencies, right? All kinds of stuff that's going on. But is that something that you're willing to take risk with? Thanks for hopping on. I'll see you guys next week. Bye.